Most of the frustration you've had in your vegetable garden this year probably has less to do with your skill than you think. It has to do with what's in your seed packets. The varieties lined up at every garden center, the tidy hybrid tomatoes, the uniform lettuces, the bred for shipping peppers, were never chosen to feed a family. They were chosen to survive a mechanical harvest, a week in cold storage, and a grocery display that still has to look pretty on day 8. Flavor, toughness, pest resistance, and real yield per square foot all quietly slipped down the priority list somewhere around the 1950s, and most of us have been paying for that decision ever since. The part almost nobody says out loud is that there's another group of vegetables out there, a sizable one, that never went through any of that selection. They were kept alive by old farmers, by cottage gardeners, by immigrant grandparents, by a handful of seed savers who simply refused to let them disappear. They're still in catalogs, if you know where to look. Many of them are perennial, meaning you plant them once and harvest for 10 or 20 years. Most of them laugh at the pests modern hybrids collapse in front of. And almost none of them ask for the babysitting routine a supermarket-style garden demands. Today we'll walk through 15 of them, real crops. Things your great-grandparents grew without fuss. Things the Royal Horticultural Society and the Kew seed collections still quietly preserve because of what's inside those seeds. By the end, I'll tell you which 3 I'd start with, if you only want to try a toe in the water. Because honestly, once even one of these takes hold in your garden, you'll start questioning everything else in your beds. Let's start with one most British and American gardeners have walked past for a century. It's called Good King Henry. Despite the odd name, this is one of the most useful perennial greens you can plant. The leaves taste like a mild, earthier spinach. The young flower shoots can be steamed like thin asparagus. And here's the part that matters. The plant does not bolt in summer the way spinach does. You pick a handful of outer leaves each week from spring straight into autumn, and it comes back stronger every year. The RHS lists it as hardy through most of the UK, and it holds up across USDA zones 4 to 9, meaning if you're gardening anywhere from Glasgow to Georgia, it will survive your winter. It tolerates partial shade, so it also fills that awkward spot behind the shed where nothing else wants to produce. Give it 2 seasons to settle, and it becomes, in practical terms, maintenance-free food, which already points to something important. Most of the crops on this list are perennial. That alone changes what gardening feels like. Every spring, you're not starting from zero. You're managing a standing crew of food plants that are already awake and pushing leaves before your tomato seeds have even sprouted under the grow lights. And that's where people who lean into this category stop feeling rushed every April. The second one is a root vegetable called skirret. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Skirret was one of the most important sweet roots in European kitchen gardens for nearly 1,000 years, and then it vanished in the last century. Not because people stopped liking it, but because the roots grow in clusters and can't be sorted by a machine. They're gray outside, white inside, slender, and naturally sweet, somewhere between a parsnip and a carrot with a cleaner, slightly nutty finish. Old English cookbooks describe skirret pie as a dessert, and that's not exaggeration. The sugars really are that noticeable. Better still, it's perennial. You dig up part of the cluster each autumn, leave the rest in the ground, and it rebuilds itself for the next season. It tolerates heavy clay, a real edge over carrots and parsnips, and it doesn't sulk in partial shade. If forked carrots or rocky soil have beaten you down before, this is the root that simply doesn't care where it's planted. The third one earns its keep on its own terms. Sea kale. It grows wild along the shingle beaches of northern Europe, and that tells you most of what you need to know. It handles salt spray, sandy soil, coastal wind, and cold that flattens most brassicas. In the garden, you let it settle for the first year or 2 without cutting anything. By the 3rd spring, you cover the emerging crown with an upturned bucket or a terracotta forcing pot for about 3 to 4 weeks to block the light. What pushes up under that darkness is pale, tender, and tastes somewhere between asparagus and a nutty broccoli. Restaurants charge a small fortune for it in season. In your own garden, a single established plant will produce that same delicacy every spring for 20 years or longer. The broad, blue-gray leaves are genuinely beautiful the rest of the summer too, which is worth remembering the next time someone tells you food plants don't belong in a front border. But here's where this story gets more interesting, because the next handful of these crops aren't just tough or easy. They were, for centuries, the main vegetables on European dinner tables. And one of the reasons they disappeared has nothing to do with taste. The reason most of them vanished is that the industrial food system couldn't figure out how to harvest them with a machine. That's it. Not flavor, not nutrition, not how easily a gardener could grow them, just whether a tractor could dig them up in one pass. And once you understand that one sentence, the entire story of the modern grocery aisle looks different. Take Scorzonera, number 4. Long black roots, rough-looking skin, and underneath, white flesh that genuinely tastes of oysters when you cook it. That's not a marketing line. It's why the French and Belgians call it salsify noir, or the oyster plant. And it's why it held a permanent spot on European tables from the 1600s well into the early 20th century. Peel it, simmer it in a little butter and stock, and you've got something that belongs in a serious kitchen. On top of the flavor, the roots are rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that's good for gut health, documented in modern nutrition research, not folklore. Scorzonera holds beautifully in the ground all winter, which means you dig roots as you need them from October into March. No storage shed, no root cellar, no plastic bags in the fridge. The plant itself will grow in heavier soil than most root crops tolerate. That's freedom a lot of gardeners didn't know was available to them. Its cousin, salsify, is number 5. And it's nearly identical in the kitchen. Same oyster note, same long root, just white-skinned instead of black. What makes salsify worth its own spot is the second year. If you leave a few plants in the ground, they throw up tall stems with purple flowers that bees love, and then drop seed everywhere. Within 2 or 3 seasons, you simply have salsify. You're not planting it anymore, you're managing it. American kitchen gardens grew salsify routinely from the colonial era into the 1920s. Look in almost any old seed catalog from that period. Burpee, Landreth, Thorburn, and it's there, usually alongside the parsnips. Then it quietly dropped out. Same reason as Scorzonera. A machine couldn't handle it. Number 6 gives you a different kind of value. It's called Hamburg parsley, sometimes sold as root parsley. Above ground, it looks like the flat-leaf parsley you already know, and you can cut the tops all season for the kitchen. Below ground, it builds a creamy white root, somewhere between parsnip and celeriac in flavor, that goes into soups and stews the same way. 2 crops from one plant in the same square foot of soil. It handles partial shade, which is rare for a root vegetable, and the leaves actually get sweeter after the first frost. Something cooperative extension guides across the northeastern United States have noted for decades. If you've got a shaded corner where nothing productive will grow, this is the plant you stop ignoring. Which brings us to one I want you to pay close attention to, because if you only adopt one plant from this whole video, it should probably be lovage. Most gardeners file lovage under herbs and use a couple of leaves in a stock pot twice a year. That's a mistake. Lovage was never really an herb in the European tradition. It was a vegetable. It grows 6 to 8 feet tall. It's bone-hardy down to brutal winters. It's perennial for decades. And nearly every part of the plant feeds you. The leaves taste like a deeper, richer celery and go into soups, stews, and salads. The hollow stems can be blanched and eaten like celery itself, or candied the old-fashioned way. The roots taste like a cross between celery and parsnip. The seeds are a spice. From a single established plant, you can harvest something edible across roughly 8 months of the year in temperate climates, which is more productive on a per square foot basis than almost any annual you could plant in that spot. The RHS lists it as fully hardy in the UK, and it's grown successfully across most of the continental United States. If you have one corner of your garden where you want a plant that just quietly feeds you without any attention, that's lovage. Now, before we go further, let me clear up a piece of bad advice you've probably heard repeated online. There's a common belief that heirloom and old-world vegetables are harder to grow than modern hybrids. That gets repeated so often it sounds true. It isn't. It's almost exactly backwards. Hybrids were bred for commercial conditions: heavy irrigation, consistent fertilizer, pest management at scale. Take those supports away, which is basically what every home gardener does, and hybrids struggle. The older varieties on this list were selected over centuries of backyard growing by people who couldn't afford a failed season. What survived was whatever kept producing under neglect. That's why they look tough to us now. They were never bred for anything else. Number 7 is a plant that looks dramatic in a garden and feeds you well. Cardoon. It's a close cousin of the artichoke, but instead of harvesting the flower bud, you harvest the thick leaf stems. The plant grows 6 feet tall with silver foliage, and in late summer you tie the leaves together and mound soil around the base for about 3 weeks. When you cut it and peel off the outer fibers, you get something that tastes like artichoke heart crossed with tender celery. Excellent in a gratin, in a braise, or simply simmered with olive oil and lemon. Mediterranean in origin, Cardoon handles heat and drought without flinching, and deer generally leave it alone, which is a real consideration for anyone gardening on the edge of woodland. It wants space and sun, and in return, it gives you a serious vegetable from a single plant. And number 8 is the one that tends to surprise people the most. It's called crosnes, also known as Chinese artichoke, and it's quite possibly the easiest productive vegetable I know. Crosnes grow small white tubers, 2 or 3 inches long, with ridged segments that honestly look a little strange the first time you dig them. Get past the appearance. The flavor is somewhere between an artichoke heart and a water chestnut, and the texture stays crisp even after a quick sauté. Something you almost never get from a cooked root vegetable. French kitchens have used them since the 19th century, which is where the name comes from, though the plant itself is East Asian. In the garden, they behave like a perennial ground cover. You plant a few tubers in spring. By autumn of the second year, you have more than you can eat. They tolerate shade, they're hardy through cold winters, and the tubers can stay in the ground until you want them. The one drawback, the reason they never went commercial: they bruise and shrivel within days of being pulled from the soil. For a grocery chain, that's a deal breaker. For you, standing in your own garden with a fork in hand, it simply doesn't matter. Number 9 is sea beet, which is the wild ancestor of every beet, every Swiss chard, and every sugar beet in existence. It still grows along the coasts of Britain and northern Europe today, and if you've ever tried to kill chard and failed, sea beet is what chard wishes it were. The leaves taste like a deeper, slightly mineral chard, and you cut the outer ones continuously from spring into late autumn. It tolerates poor sandy soil, salt, drought, wet ground, all of it. It doesn't bolt the way spinach does at the first sign of heat. Its deep taproot pulls minerals from below where most annuals can't reach, which is why the leaves tend to be denser in nutrients than cultivated chard grown on the same plot. Plant it once, harvest for years. That's the trade. Number 10 is Orach, sometimes called mountain spinach, and it was the main summer green in European kitchen gardens for more than 1,000 years, until spinach quietly replaced it in the 1600s. Why spinach won is still honestly a bit of a mystery, because Orach is the better plant in almost every practical sense. It doesn't bolt in heat. It grows fast, up to 6 feet tall. It tolerates drought far better than spinach. It comes in green, deep red, and a golden yellow form, so a row of mixed Orach in the garden looks like something from a botanical illustration. Let one plant go to seed at the end of the season, and you'll have volunteer Orach in that bed for the rest of your gardening life. If you've given up on summer greens because everything bolts by July, this is the one to test. At this point, if you're starting to feel that sense of, wait, why was none of this in any of the gardening books I was handed? You're having the correct reaction. That feeling is why the like button matters on a video like this. It's the only way the algorithm puts this kind of content in front of more gardeners who've been quietly frustrated with what they were sold. If this is useful, take 2 seconds to hit it. Let's keep going. Number 11 is called Alexanders, or sometimes horse parsley. Before celery was even domesticated, this is what Europeans used in its place. The Romans grew it, medieval monasteries grew it in their physic gardens, and it naturalized so thoroughly along the British and Irish coasts that you can still find it growing wild today. The leaves taste like celery with more backbone. The stems blanch up tender and sweet in late spring. The flower buds work like tiny, sprouting broccoli. The seeds are a spice. 5 uses from one plant, and it tolerates partial shade, poor soil, and coastal wind. Once you have it, it self-seeds. The only reason celery replaced it on dinner tables is that celery is milder, which, if you actually want vegetables to taste like something, is not an argument in celery's favor at all. Number 12 is patience dock, a perennial relative of sorrel with larger, milder leaves and a clean, lemony bite. In Old English gardens, this was one of the first greens available in spring, sometimes pushing up through late snow. It handles almost any soil, tolerates sun or shade, and once it's established, it delivers a steady stream of leaves from March until hard frost. Like most leaves in this family, patience dock is high in oxalic acid, so you cook it or use it in moderate amounts, rather than eating bowls of it raw, the same rule that applies to spinach and rhubarb leaves. Beyond that, it asks nothing from you. The name itself came from the old idea that this plant patiently fed families every year, whether they tended it or not, which is still accurate. Now let's jump hemispheres, because 3 of the most remarkable vegetables on this list came out of the high Andes, and they deserve more attention than they've ever gotten in the north. Number 13 is OK, sometimes called New Zealand yam, because New Zealand adopted it enthusiastically in the 1800s. In the Andes, it was the second most important crop after the potato, and once you grow it, you'll understand why. The tubers come in brilliant colors: pink, red, yellow, orange, striped, and they taste like a lemony potato, tart when raw, sweet and nutty when cooked. The plants look almost ornamental above ground, like oversized clover with yellow flowers. Here's the part you have to know before planting, because the gardening books rarely spell it out. Oca only forms tubers when the day length drops below about 12 hours, which means the real swell happens in October and into November. If you're in a region with an early hard freeze, you need a sheltered spot or a light row cover to buy those last few weeks. Get that timing right, and a single plant yields several pounds of some of the most beautiful food you'll ever pull out of the ground. Number 14 is Yacon, and if any vegetable deserves to be called a hidden treasure, this is the one. Yacon grows as a tall South American perennial, shoulder-high plants that look a little like soft-leaved sunflowers, with small yellow flowers in late summer. But the real reward is underground. In autumn, you dig up clusters of tubers that look like sweet potatoes, but eat like fruit, crisp, juicy, sweet, somewhere between a pear and a water chestnut. The sweetness comes primarily from fructooligosaccharides, a type of fiber your body doesn't digest as sugar, which is why Yacon has quietly picked up attention in the nutrition world as a low glycemic sweetener. It's actively researched at agricultural universities in Peru, Brazil, and Japan. Store the tubers for a couple of weeks after harvest, and they grow sweeter, not softer, as the starches convert. Above ground, the plant is tough. Below ground, it's generous. And you can split the crown every autumn to replant for the next year, so once you buy a single Yacon, you effectively never buy one again. Number 15 is the one I've been saving, because it closes the circle on everything we've talked about today. It's called Ulluco, a small, glossy tuber from the high Andes, grown at elevations above 12,000 feet, in thin soil and brutal weather where almost no other vegetable can hold ground. The tubers come in streaked pinks, oranges, yellows, and magentas, so bright they barely look real when you first dig them. The flavor is mild and slightly nutty, closer to a waxy new potato than anything else in the northern kitchen. The leaves are edible too, eaten like spinach in Bolivian and Peruvian cooking. Ulluco fed people for thousands of years in one of the harshest growing environments on the planet, which is the real headline here, not the color. When a plant has been productive under that much stress for that long, it has absolutely nothing to fear from your backyard in Ohio or Yorkshire. It's a long season crop, so like okay, it swells its tubers late as the days shorten. Give it the time it needs, and it rewards you disproportionately. So that's the list. 15 vegetables, almost none of them in a grocery store, most of them easier and more forgiving than what you're currently trying to keep alive. Here's what I want you to take from this, because it's bigger than any single plant. The story of modern vegetables is not a story of progress. It's a story of trade-offs, and most of those trade-offs were made for reasons that had nothing to do with the person growing food at home. Shelf life, shipping durability, uniform size for a conveyor belt, a color that photographs well under supermarket lighting. Those are the qualities that shaped the seeds you've been handed. Flavor, toughness, nutrition, and the ability to thrive without constant intervention were quietly set aside. And once you see that clearly, the struggles many gardeners blame on themselves start to look more honestly like struggles built into the varieties themselves. The good news, and it really is good news, is that nothing in this story is permanent. The older vegetables never fully disappeared. Seed savers kept them. Small seed houses still sell them. Real seeds in Wales, King's Seeds in the UK, Baker Creek and Seed Savers Exchange in the United States, and the Royal Horticultural Society's own heritage seed libraries all carry a surprising amount of what we covered today. A packet cost you a couple of pounds or a few dollars. That's the barrier between you and a garden that feels, honestly, a lot more like the one your grandparents might have kept. If you want a place to start without getting overwhelmed, here's what I'd pick. Start with Lovage, because one plant gives you back more than a whole row of celery ever will. Add Good King Henry, because it fills the gap. Spinach keeps failing in every summer. And if you've got space for a third, plant OK, because once you dig your first handful of colored tubers out of the ground in autumn, something in the way you think about your garden shifts permanently. Those three alone will change the rhythm of your growing year. Everything else on this list is a door you can walk through later, whenever you're ready. One last thing before we wrap up, because it matters. A productive garden doesn't come from buying more products. It comes from choosing better plants. Soil, water, attention, those matter, obviously. But the single biggest lever most gardeners never pull is the choice of what they put in the ground in the first place. Swap in one or two of these older varieties, and the same work you were already doing starts producing noticeably more food, with fewer failures, across a longer season. That's the leverage. If you got real value out of this today, if even one of these 15 vegetables made you stop and think, that's going in my garden next season, do me a small favor. Drop the word grow in the comments. It tells me which of you are serious about actually putting some of this into the ground, and it helps this video reach other gardeners who've been quietly frustrated for a long time without knowing why. And go ahead and hit the like button while you're at it. Not for me. For the next gardener who's about to give up on a row of sickly hybrid tomatoes and doesn't yet know there's another way. Tell me in the comments which of the 15 you'd plant first. I read them. And I'll see you in the next one.